where lust for a whole life and nothing but less makes people jump out of a comfortable pond into an unknown ocean. Welcome to that journey between the East and the West. Who says Rolling Stones don't gather moss? Hello, everyone. I am Meenu Gupta, your host for the day, and I'm delighted to have you join me every week as amazing people share their incredible and inspiring life stories of straddling continents. Thank you. Many years ago, a young 20-year-old youth from Germany set out to tour the world with a backpack. He had 40,000 marks in his travel pouch, dreams in his eyes, and music in his soul. He had driven taxis and trucks and was now embarking on the adventure of his lifetime. He backpacked through many countries for a few years. Then that man went on to become a diplomat and a professional musician. Interesting fact, 40 years later approximately, after his backpacking days, he had the opportunity to become the German ambassador to one of the countries he'd found truly fascinating during his trip, and that was India. My guest for today, Walter Lindner, has had a long journey between the East and the West, and of course the South. He's a former state secretary of the German Foreign Office and has served as a German ambassador to multiple countries across the globe. As a musician, he has released 6 records, and as an author, he has just released a book. Did I forget to mention that he's also multilingual? So a very, very warm welcome, Walter. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Meena, and it's a very nice introduction. I'm really flabbergasted.
That's your life in half a paragraph, but now we'll get into all the in-betweens.
Yes.
Who are you beyond the roles you have played professionally and personally?
I think, first and foremost, I'm a humble person. I'm a human. And I'm a human with open eyes and open ears. And what taught me life in these 65 years was humbleness, because very well it could have been that I was not born in rich country like Germany, in Munich, born to some well-off parents. But let's say, I could have been born in Quetzaltenango in Guatemala or in any other place in the world. And this is not by my own earnings that I was born here. It's not my own, it's a result of my own doing that was born there. It was fate or destination or predestination, what maybe people in India would say. It could also have been that someone I meet somewhere out there in the world could have been not born in a poor country, but in a rich country. So the matter of the birthplace is something which is not a shame, or it's not a positive thing on your vita. It's something you have to be aware of all the time, that fate could have been totally different to you and you would be in a total different situation. That makes you, or makes me, when I'm traveling and when I'm anywhere in the world, humble. And it makes me very, very allergic against this kind of prepotentious behavior of people, mainly in the West, by the way, who think, oh, it's our own earning that we are well off. No, it's not. It's maybe it contributed to it later on in your life, but the chances you got were determined by the place you were born and the family you were born to.
I totally understand that, and I agree with you on that, because it is, as some people in the West might say, a chance, but as us Indians might say, your destiny. So in your non-conscious person, you didn't make that choice. It was made before. So I like that.
In our lives, we have so many bifurcations. How would you say it in normal plain English? It's so many choices you make along your way. Maybe you make even every day 5 choices. But in your professional life, you make a choice whether you go to a good school or bad school, whether you have good friends or bad friends, whether you have good marks in school or not so good marks, whether you pass a test or not. So along the way, there's so many things which depend on circumstances, on other things, so that where we end in the end, when we look back, has had a lot to do with luck and with coincidences. And maybe, again, coming from India, with the way you treat people, the way you put your inside outside, and maybe this gives you a good karma so that the outcome is good. I don't know whether, this is always the truth, but I tend to believe in that. If you are behaving well and reporting well, then it will in the end pay back.
That is karma. I mean, in the words of the Indian philosophy, yes, that would be karma. The outcome, the result is based. Actually, it's very logical if one looks at it. The outcome is based on what the inputs.
Yeah, true. But it doesn't explain all the good life of bad people who have a bad life and still live in wealth and whatever. Maybe the payback time is after their death. Maybe that's the truth.
I totally agree there, and probably it could also be, as you rightly pointed out, based on previous lives. So the part of something is coming back as a result now, in my understanding, humble opinion, and part of that is rolling out now. But as the wise would say, we are living in still in the beginnings of the Kali Yuga. So everything comes out, the results come out faster, is what is generally said. Not that I'm an expert, but yes, somewhere the payback will happen.
Yeah, hopefully. Nobody knows exactly, because that's, at the end, we are wise after our last day on this planet. And after that, we will see who was right, which philosophy was right, which religion was right, or which point of view was right. The nihilists, Nietzsche, and who say after life there's nothing, there's a black hole and there's nothing. Is he right? Or are the Christians right when they see there is a heaven with a God and whatever? Or are the Hindus right when they say there is freedom from being reborn? So you have this kind of nirvana thing. Or are the Buddhists right? So the thing is that no human being knows what is happening afterwards. Nobody returned from that side. So that's why, again, I sometimes think when I see religious fanatism, I see, where do those guys get their security from? How are they so sure that they are right? Maybe they're wrong. And maybe another God was right and they are all damned. So that's, I mean, in our days where we think of technology and of logic and of facts and whatever and science, there's very few time that people dedicate their thoughts and this kind of thoughts. But after all, these kind of thoughts are more important than anything else, because it determines what happens to all of us and where we came from.
I actually totally understand that. And the fanaticism generally, and not only fanaticism, majority of the people have a tendency to stick to their beliefs, but beliefs are also thought based. And the more you stick to them, the more one moves away from the core, because also the beliefs happen for some reasons which are evidence based with the eyes, ears. But again, it's a small world that you can see with the physical eyes. There is much more that we don't see than what we see actually.
You mentioned rightly that I have traveled due to my profession, and also due to my backpacking, through most of the countries in the world. And it's true that wherever you travel, you, of course, ask yourself the questions, why are those people live there? But in any case, there has been no other country like India. And I don't say this because now we are in an Indian topic interview, but no other country than India gave me such a strong urge to think about these things. No other country put spirituality and these thoughts so much in the forefront than India did. Let me give an example. As ambassador, I had often meetings with very high-ranking CEOs who came to me to the residence and talked about anything. I remember a guy from CEO from Siemens, I guess it was, very high-ranking, and he came in the morning at 8 o'clock to had an appointment with me, wanted to bring up some kind of business issues, and he came in and had a red dot on his forehead, of course. And so I asked him, "Oh, so you just good morning? How are you? Great, good to see you. Oh, I see you have had your puja already this morning. So your service." And he said yes, and then take a seat, and then we were talking about what kind of puja he did there and who participates and where the goddess is, who he was praying to. And in no time we were in exactly the same questions like we did right now. Where did we come from? Why are you and me? And what happens afterwards? And who is right in all these philosophies? So we talked like 45 minutes about this topic. And then in the last 10 minutes before he left the residence, he said, yeah, I have to go now, but let me come to my business issue. So this kind of encounter, I think it will rarely happen in anywhere in the Western world or not even in Africa. So this is India, because this is 7,000 years of spirituality and of deep rooted thinking. And so that's why you were asking that India was fascinating me among all these countries. And this is one of the major reasons, because it touches a string inside you, which is deeply human and which is not depending of your passport or your skin color. It is human questions. And in our world of rushing through the days and whatever, these things are too often neglected. In India, they're not so much neglected, because you can see that people are very dedicated to, as described, to pujas and to services and to spirituality, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. That was interesting. You mentioned about why you are you and why I am I, and the others are others, and so on, and why the diversity in a way. I had the opportunity to interact with one, I believe he's a leader of Vedanta in the world, and he's based in Chicago, a management person who actually quit everything and became a monk, Swami Sarpriyananda. And I was also been doing of reading and meditating, and by chance, it just came out the way we are talking. It suddenly, with him, he was constantly ahead of the flow. Whatever I wanted to ask him or talk about, he was going exactly on that, but one step ahead. And I asked him the same question. What happened? How are we here? I mean, exactly what you just mentioned, and the big black hole, and what happened. So did God one day wake up and the consciousness and said, hey, I'm getting bored and like I want to create many. And actually he laughed. He said, this is exactly actually what happened in his terminology. And therefore it is called Leela, the one consciousness decided one day to become diverse into multiple beings. So at the end of the day, it is the same one consciousness. That is what we see today in diversity. But the same consciousness is running through everything. So therefore we are one. It made sense. It makes sense when I think of it. And I feel that when there's something which makes sense, I feel it. I can understand it logically with a brain and also feel it with another part. So it made sense.
Yeah, I mean, diversity in the spiritual sense is welcome, and it's good. I think if they are in the offering more different paths to the final truth. Fine, let's have 50 religions, and everyone just tries and struggles to find the right way for an illumination or for answering the most urgent questions of humanity. Where do we come from? Where do we go to? And this kind of thing. We have a soul and these kind of things. I think it's a great thing that we have a lot of different paths. So that's another reason in India. You go there, and this is where Buddhism came from. I mean, at least where Buddha got his enlightenment under the tree in Bihar, or where all the Hindu goddesses were. But you have also Muslims, you have Christians, you have Saints, you have all the religions. And if they are coexisting peacefully among each other, beside each other, that's perfect, because it's just human to offer different options. So I'm very happy with it. It's just not good when diversity ends up into hatred and excluding each other and no tolerance. This is not good, and this is what happens often when you have fanatics and like we had recently with the Hamas or the 9/11 with the Crusades in the Middle Age, or this kind of violence put into segregating yourself from the others. But otherwise, diversity is just totally welcome. I'm happy we live in a diverse world where we have options. The only thing is that mostly your belonging to a religion depends on the birthplace or on the family you were born in. I remember traveling through the Balkan countries. There you have in one village you have Christians and Catholics. In the next village, you have Protestants. In the next village, you have Serbian Orthodox. And next, you have Islam. So four different religions in within 50 kilometers. And if you ask people, why are you Christian or Catholic and not a Protestant or Muslim? It's just because of the parents, because of the fact they were born into this family. So the choice to make, not everyone makes a choice. They say, okay, the choice was made before me and I was born into this family, so I belong to this religion. I mean, in optimal world, it would be that once you reach a certain age where you can decide yourself, when your conscious awakes between 10 and 15 or 20, then you have a whole option package in front of you of different religions. You read the Bible, you read the Quran, you read holy books of many religions, and then decide, okay, which is appealing more to you. And then you make a choice and belong to one religion. This is a theory. In practice, it doesn't happen. So, but me as a traveler and lucky enough to travel in so many countries in the world, I have seen that, options are out there, and people in the South Sea, because they belong to, let's say, Tahiti or another island, they belong to these religions. If there is a God out there, it doesn't matter where you are born. It's a common truth which all human mankind share. And they have different names for it. That's fine. But in the end, we all meet again somewhere up there. And hopefully, according to the well-doing on this planet, hopefully it's not, hopefully it does matter how you behave on this planet.
I totally agree with the choosing of a faith or what you choose to follow or not follow or just observe in life. And when people ask me my religion, generally, I tell them I'm a spiritual human being. Humanity is first my religion and then others. So I have also taken widely from multiple faiths, Jainism, Buddhism, Hinduism. They all have beautiful ways of rendering truth, giving multiple facets, even Christianity, the comparisons. So, and I'm hoping to sharing with my son, or have a 9-year-old, the same, that okay,
Yeah,
these are whatever, and at some point in life he can choose whatever he wants. I'm
yeah.
just hopefully giving him nuggets of wisdom from different places.
And then in the end, maybe it's not so important which religion he's choosing, if the truly understood religion is the one which we define as leading to the common goal, that we live peaceful together and behave well and are good persons. So then it doesn't matter what religion, what's the name of the religion, whether it's Islam or Christians or Buddhism or Hindu or what, it doesn't matter that much if it is an instruction how to behave as a human, as a good hearted human. If this is the sense of a religion, it's very fine. So, but you see, it's funny that we talk about this in an environment which could be also political, and and you mentioned the different jobs I did in my professional life. These topics were very seldom coming on the surface, because it's all about politics and economy, and this is all good because we earn our money through this kind of analysis, whatever. But deep down, I think that's why coming back to your beginning question, who are you? Deep down, I'm a person who is spiritual and who is searching for the truth. And luckily enough, I had a job which helped me to do so, because I could travel a lot. I could meet a lot of different people. And, but deep down, whether I'm a musician or a traveler or a taxi driver or a diplomat or a state secretary, it's still me. It's still me, the searching soul.
Yes, these are all labels. I totally agree. And yes, this talk was also not on my agenda, but as it flew the way it was supposed to. And yeah, and you mentioned about the impression of India and the fascination. What would be interesting for me to understand and know, 40 years ago, before you, on the way of your other travels, you backpacked and reached India, there must have been a certain image in your mind before you landed there. So I'm
Yeah.
curious about that
Yeah.
image.
I think it all depends also on the age and on the decade you were born,
Mhm.
and the area in the world. Now, me being born in the 50s in Europe meant was after the Second World War, and people were totally involved in forgetting the horrors of the war, building up things, making money, these kind of things. Not on the spiritual thing, because spiritually they were totally devastated in the Second World War, because it was a moral bankruptcy, especially for the Germans, but for everyone. This World War was just killing and killing and killing. So I guess philosophy and religion and all this was on the back burner. People were trying to distract themselves and to, build up. So they build up Germany again, build up Europe again. For us youngsters in the 60s, and not only for me in Germany, but also in many in the West, this was not enough. This building up and money making and forgetting the past was not enough. We thought there is much more. That's why a lot of protest emerged there. In the US against the Vietnam War, in Europe against our parents who participated in the Holocaust or in the cruelties of the war. We asked our parents, what did you do there? So it was a pretty confrontational situation in the 60s and 70s. This was linked to a so-called subculture, what the traditional culture defined as subculture. Subculture was a culture which was not the mainstream culture. Mainstream culture was, classical music and these kind of old-fashioned things. Subculture was a complete new lifestyle of the youngsters. We had long hair. Why? Because we wanted to be different. We had different ways of clothes, jeans and these kind of things. We didn't want to run around with ties and whatever. Then profession. We didn't want to go into career, pre-prepared career things. We said, no, we want to earn money along the way, and we want to live, and we want to see the world, and we want to experience something different. And this very soon turned from the rock music and the Western internal societies into the search for something in the East. Because we knew, I'm talking about the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s, we knew there must be more out there. And there was, apart from books you could read like Hermann Hesse, Siddhartha, which was in school already a kind of an hint that there is some kind of an Eastern wisdom out there. There was, for many of my generation, I mean, I'm not saying everyone was like me in this generation, but for those who were sort of awakening to this kind of new spirit, there was a very iconic concert. And you would not believe this changed my life, this concert. And this concert was also linked to India because it was, I remember when I was born, but 71, when East Pakistan broke away and became Bangladesh, this war, which is still very present in India. And this led to a huge human catastrophe of 500,000 refugees. And so anyway, there was a huge humanitarian disaster there. And in this generation, there was especially the Beatles, George Harrison, who was very close for other reasons with Ravi Shankar, who set up a solidarity concert. It's called the Concert for Bangladesh, and it was in the Madison Square Garden in New York. And the brand new thing was that on one side, you had all these hippie type musicians from Eric Clapton to Bob Dylan, to George Harrison and Ringo Starr and, Lionel, whatever, all these musicians. But after half an hour playing, the door in the stage opened and out there came Indian musicians, Ravi Shankar and his band. And they were not dressed in jeans and whatever. They were dressed in impeccable white longis, in kurtas. And they looked like coming from a different planet. Here, those wild guys, which looked all like me, we dressed all the same. On the other side, you had these Indian people. And this moment, I think I was 14 years old. I saw it in television. And this changed my life because I saw this and I said, oh my gosh, I have to see this. And it became an obsession for me to go to the place where these musicians come from. These musicians, I learned, of course, came from a different philosophy and a different kind of life perception. And it was, for me, connected with India. Nothing else in Asia, it was connected in India. And many of my generation had the same idea when they saw this concert. Later on, I talked to a lot of people who were met in India who said exactly the same as I. They saw this and they said, oh my gosh, I have to see this. Now, this is how a whole generation tried to get to India in the 70s and to participate in the wisdom there. Of course, the perception we had from India, or me, was a very idealistic one, a very dreamlike one. It was not at all realistic. I sort of portrayed everything which I was missing in the West, in Europe, into this. I thought everyone sits under mango tree and is meditating and, and praying a sea time, whatever. Well, this led to the so-called hippie trail, which was it called last in the end. It is an overland travel of my generation who left Germany and mostly came with a magic bus from London or from Amsterdam and left on a 6 month trail to India overland. At that time, it was a kind of I don't know, it's a kind of a caravan of people who had this kind of flower power hippie things in their mind. But apart from that, it was in the search of something beyond capitalistic thoughts. It was the thought, what else is there in life? What kind of philosophy do they offer? Now, when I reached there, I described this also in my book. It was a total disappointment because I traveled from Amritsar to Delhi in a very slow train, which tourist class at that time, this was, you had people entered from the windows and, it was overcrowded, hot, I didn't understand anything, dirty. And that's how I ended up in New Delhi. And, after a long 6 months of traveling through, Iran and Afghanistan, so the perception of India grew bigger and bigger and bigger. So it was like a promised land. Came there and the reality was different, was hot, humid, loud, dirty, and not at all philosophical and spiritual. It was fighting for the daily life. And that's how you end up there. It's not you go to the best hotels and have, all these rich people around. No, you live with the normal people. In the backpacker area in Delhi was the red light district beyond the railway station. This is the reality you see there. This is the real India you see there. And so I must say, after the first 2-3 months, I said, I can't stand this. I have to move on. I stayed a bit longer, but I found peace and reconciliation with my idea of India more outside the big cities. So I went to Agra, I went down to Bhubaneswar, and I went to Goa and other places. So out there, you could find this India which I was imagining, but it's not so easy to find. And it was not so easy to find. But still, after a while, I made my peace with it and said, okay, but I have to leave after a few months because I think human condition is not really made for this kind of street life in India. If you are traveling in a nice way, but if you are sharing the life with all at that time there were already 500 or 600 million people, with all the people on the streets, it's very demanding. So I took off to Nepal to reconcile a bit with in the mountains, and I didn't want to go back right now to India because I said I continue traveling, and I traveled around the globe for 4 years, and I came back after 4 years to Germany. But in all these years, I been in Latin America, been in other places in Asia, in the Pacific Ocean, in Canada, in the US. I always kept revisiting my impressions from India. And believe it or not, my whole life I had this Indian image of India, or this unsolved enigma India in my soul. I always thought I have to come back for the next chapter of my experiences with India. And professionally, I came back several times, but to live there, I came back maybe 40 years after I came as a backpacker to the red light area in Delhi. I came arriving as a future ambassador in India and had my driver and, had opportunity, of course, to see a different India. But I always came back to the people out there and told my people in the embassy, maybe because of my experiences from earlier on, get out there, see how the people live, see how the poor people live, see how the handicraft producing people live, see how the people who are doing the laundry live. Talk to everyone, and then you get an idea of the DNA of India. India is so fascinating.
That was your pre-image when you went first time? That was the impression that changed a bit, or more images and impressions happened, and then you landed up like almost 40 years later, still the same searching soul. There was probably a nerve which was touched that many years ago, and that nerve needed more impressions and a building up. So in that build up, you were there from, I believe, 2019 to 2022. So, how was that build up? And that also is, again, not only about your impressions, it's also the country went through a lot of changes. It's a evolution, complete turning around, and extremely fast paced
Yeah,
changes. So,
yeah.
I mean, that was the India then in your mind, the impressions, and then what happened now that you got to live there
Well,
for, I think, 3 years?
3.5 years. Yeah. Well, I mean, first, I think it's important to see that this is a country with 7,000 years of history. Now, coming back after 40 years, the time span of 40 years is nothing in comparison to 7,000 years. So, what could have changed in India in 40 years, which didn't change the last 6,000 years? In other words, there are a lot of things where you find the old India. I mean, you go to Varanasi, then it doesn't matter whether I went there 40 years ago and was there with an open mouth and seeing all the sadhus sitting there, and or whether I went there as ambassador later, 40 years later, or if people went there 300 years ago. Varanasi is Varanasi, and Hampi is Hampi. And, the old culture is there, and the old India is to be found if you look for it. But of course, there is a total different India. First of all, when I went as backpacker, I didn't have, of course, the contacts to politicians, to journalists, intellectuals. So I was, as I said, I was living with the Indians on the street. So my perception then was not with much input from the intellectual side. Of course, the modern way of living, of course, made things a bit more uniform in the world. If you go to Los Angeles these days, or to Buenos Aires, or to Delhi, or to Manila, the tendency is to see the same kind of achievements of cultural achievements, which is cars and floor to ceiling buildings, people with the headphones running around no time. And so this kind of India, of course, you find also these days. But of course, as a diplomat, you meet a lot of scientists, intellectuals, whatever. And then you see what kind of achievements this country has made, from the pharma industry to the space ships to the super ultra modern high speed trains to metros in almost 50 cities in the country. And it's to a point that India has become, in some aspects, a model for the rest of the world, how they deal with mass population transport systems, with clean water, with wastewater, with plastic, and this kind of thing. So you have a lot of, how you would say, showcase ways of dealing with world problems, which you see now in India. IT, artificial intelligence, they are very, very close to the world top notches, much more than in Europe, by the way, in some aspects. So you have at the same time, that's the contradiction in India. I guess in India, my experience is always a land of extremes and a land of contradictions. You find one thing and you find exactly the contrary too. You find poverty, total poverty, but you find opulence and richness. You find beauty and you find ugly things. So it's a kind of a country where you have, within one country, you have, let's say, the whole aspect of life, in the good and in the bad aspects. It's a country where you have many different countries in different times living together. It's like not only one country, but 10, 12, 20 countries, and not living just in this time zone, but also in the time zone of 300 years ago. So you have this kind of package you get, which makes India difficult to grasp. It's one of the reasons I tried to write this book now, to make it understandable for someone from the West traveling to India, and to grasp it, to find the way to approach it, because it's complicated and it's not always inviting. It's like, you could compare it to the rose. To get into to the beauty of the rose inside, you have to do away all the thorns, and the thorns being poverty, being overwhelming heat, humidity, and many challenges, and then population growth. So there's a lot of things which you find there, which makes it for a normal traveler, being a tourist or being a business person, challenging to go to India. But if you come with open eyes and with a readiness to learn from it and to see what is there to see, then it's a richness which is uncomparable to the rest of the world. That's maybe one of the reasons not everyone is now going to India as a wonderful country, because there are these challenges. But I think it's very worthwhile to go beyond the thorns and to discover all the beauty, because it's obvious for me and for many people, it's an incredible country.
And before you went there and the first time and you had these impressions, and now you had a chance to go deeper in another way. You went as another avatar of yourself in this lifetime. Let me put it that way. So, which also allowed you to see many other facets of the country. You got deeper. Now, when you left India the first thing that you started with that many years ago, the impression, did you get what you wanted? At least a sliver of it, a bit of it.
Did I find the DNA of India? Did I find the key to the enigma India? I think no, because nobody can. You can live 5 lifetimes and India will always be a mystic. It always will. That's because that's part of the character of India. It's evasive. It's plain in your eyes, yes. But then you think, okay, but is this now the real truth? And then around the corner you find something else. It's the manifold varieties, like life as such, is the secret of India. And that's why I think the search is the secret of India. So I will be, until my last breath on this earth, I will be searching. And if I would live my whole life in India, I would still be searching, because there is still some things which you haven't understood and which you will not understand, because it's maybe a divine key which you would need one day, and nobody has it. So, and at least for me, it was gift enough to be on the search in this country. It's never ending, and when I left, I thought, okay, it's my second chapter or avatar in India. Maybe a third one comes, or maybe it comes after my death. I don't know, but it's definitely something which, India doesn't leave you untouched. Either you go there and you say, oh gosh, never again, or you go there and say, oh my gosh, this is it. So it's this kind of contradiction you find, and to whom you talk to, and talk to the Dalits in Bihar, and they are untouchables there, and they have no rights and whatever. Then you think, oh my gosh, this is another place to live. But then go to the Thar Desert and meet some of the gypsies running around there with their camels and in a total freedom, and think, oh my gosh, this is also. But there are a million realities at the same time, from as I said, Bhubaneswar to Assam to Ladakh to Sanskar to Lakshadweep. This is, where do you find a country in the world which combines so many different lifestyles and life concepts?
Actually, very beautifully expressed, I must say. I have a line for that. The reality which one may be seeking is a perception. So there is something beyond that reality which sort of fulfills a thirst. And the more one sees and the more one looks, one sees another layer and another layer and another facet and more facets. And then one thinks, oh, which one is the real? But these are all real because these are all perceptions of the real. And only when one is beyond that, so what does not exist probably is really the real.
Yeah, very well put. I guess there are some sadhus and some teachers, gurus, who exactly say this. Whatever you see, it's not the real thing. It's not. It can be exchangeable, whatever. And but coming from a very science and technology and ratio-oriented society and upbringing, this costs you to follow this path. That's why I guess it took a generation of seeking flower power in dreamers to go to India to look for it. I guess a normal ordinary tourist would not go for that. They go for Ayurveda, maybe it's part of it, maybe, or to go for a yoga class and whatever. But this truth which we are talking about is something much more deeper, and you have to come to be prepared to look for it, because it's, as an Indian philosophy also says, you have to find the solution first within yourself and then outside. And I think that's the truth also when you come to India and try to find the DNA, you have to be ready for it. You have to open your heart and to say, okay, let all these impressions get down to you and then make a very unbiased decision. Is this something which touches your soul or not? And I can understand people who say, no, it is not my thing. I go to another country where I get what I see and that's it. Okay, fair enough. But for people who are searching, soul searchers, I think it's the country. Apart from that, it's a country for hikers and for people who are adventurous and who are, into culture, into temples. There's just such a variety. One of the group of people who are very fascinated by Indians are even those soul searchers. But not only that, I have 20 other hats on when I'm traveling through India. So not only the spiritual hat.
Which are the other hats?
Traveler, as 40 years ago, it was installed in me this kind of eagerness to see what's happening in the world, in every corner of the world. And so in India, when there was COVID, I got the Indian vaccinations and which enabled after a while to use the hotels again and to use the airplanes, whatever. And I traveled, I guess, to all the states and territories. And so traveler, but then politician also, because I'm also interested how is India and Modi government dealing with the challenges of mankind in this time and now. Economy, of course, because we have 2,000 German companies in India, and India is now the fifth biggest world economy, and they're trying to overtake Germany and then Japan and then be the third biggest in the world. And then, the students, youth exchange. So there are a lot of hats I got there. Spirituality is one which I always come back to. And then of course I'm a musician, so I'm very much into Indian music, and we had quite some good collaborations with Indian musicians, and two of my friends now got a Grammy last night.
Wonderful.
Yeah, the flute player and the tabla player, and both Rakesh, the flute player, Chasaria, and then of course Sakir, the tabla player. He got three, and Rakesh got two. So we played together, and it's part of what has changed in India. If you go to Indian music, the ragas and this kind of classical Indian music has not changed, not a bit in the last, I don't know, hundreds of years. And there's quite a fight between the traditional musicians in India, the old raga players, and now the new ones who do rap and who make the compositions for Bollywood and whatever. Because for the purists of the traditional musicians, this is not music what they do nowadays. Anyway, so it's their own world what you have there in music and arts. So this is another hat of course I was wearing. You see, busy times.
Yes, and actually, like another session I had, I was telling you, this was going to be my next question to you. How about the evolution of your music and the influences of the East on your music? Because when you originally began in Germany, that was, as I'm assuming, I believe that you play many instruments, but initially it must have been as a purist. You used the words, and then you traveled through countries, and then you discovered India in all her many avatars. How has your music flown with that?
Yeah, you see, I started off in Germany as a classical trained musician, played flute and piano and played in orchestras, classical orchestras. So this was my upbringing. But of course, being a rebel when I was 10, 12 or so, I got electric guitar and then of course it was rock musician. So I turned from classic, which I continued all the time, then to jazz, to rock, and then to jazz. Indian music, on the other hand, is a total different thing. Indian music never mingled with the Western music. Never, never. It was only until the Beatles. No, it was until Yehudi Menuhin, which was an Armenian British violinist, one of the best of the century. He gave a concert I think it was in Mumbai in the 60s. And it was one of the best violin players, classical violin players. He played Mozart and Beethoven, whatever. And a very young Indian musician came to see his concert I think it was in Mumbai, or it was somewhere in Europe. I don't remember. And this young musician was Ravi Shankar. And when he saw Yehudi Menuhin playing the violin, he said, okay, one day we should work together. because he has such a pristine tone. And then Yehudi Menuhin, coming from an Armenian family, was very open towards kind of Far Eastern, Middle Eastern, and then Indian influences. So they decided in '67 to do something which has to do with your program, because they recorded a CD which was called East Meets West. And it is one of the most beautiful records you can ever do, because it was not that, you include some sitar in a kind of a Western thing. No, it was Menuhin entered the Indian music and improvised as a Western musician, violinist, wonderful virtuoso, and he improvised there. And they have made a wonderful record, East Meets West, which was an eye opener for many, because was it classical music? Was it German or European classical music? Was it Indian classical music? So this was the beginning. Now, they recorded in the Abbey Road studios in London, where the Beatles had this zebra crossing thing. And when they were recording in another studio, there were the Beatles recording at the same time by coincidence. So this is how Ravi Shankar and George Harrison met, because he was recording with this violinist and the Beatles were recording something else. Now the Beatles, through this influence, had their first integration of a sitar in the Western world, which was Norwegian woods. Maybe you remember that this is where one of the Beatles played the sitar in a very funny way. Ravi Shankar later said, "Oh, what a bad treatment of the sitar." And at the same time, the Rolling Stones had to do the same. '67, they had to include also a sitar, because it was kind of a, in that time it was a lot of drug, psychedelic stuff going on. So they integrated it in their music and had Painted Black. So Painted Black and Norwegian Woods were the first time Indian sitar was used in the Western world. But all the time it was separated. It was until then in the 70s, 80s, when the band Shakti, by the way, Shakti by John McLaughlin, got an Oscar and Grammy also yesterday, because of this heritage. So Shakti, which was John McLaughlin's band, which was where Hussein Sakir played the tablas, by the way. So this was the first time they made a kind of a mix. Otherwise, Western and Indian music never mingled. And this has a reason, because in Indian classic music, the tendency is you have one chord. The harmony is not important. It's one harmony. That's why you have a raga for the morning, for the evening, for the rain, and whatever. In the Western music, you have chords changes. So that the chords change all the time in the jazz and in rock, which you don't do in the Indian music. You have one straight chord, and what changes is the melody. In the Western music, you use the chords. You don't have just one tone. So that's why the playing together of these different concepts was, until today, it's almost impossible, because Indian music is improvised music. 90% of the raga is improvised. Now in the Western classical music, nothing is improvised. You play what other people have composed, and then you read the notes. Now if you tell an Indian musician to come into a Western orchestra and play, they would say, "What? How boring is that? If the whole concert is written already." While if you tell a Western musician to sit in a raga group, he doesn't know what to play, because he's taught to read music and not to improvise on his instrument. That's why the two concepts are very far away from each other. That's why only people like John McLaughlin and Ravi Shankar and some of the musicians which do the crossover, they can combine it. But otherwise, it's very difficult. It's reduced to the simple use of a sitar in a Western kind of harmony thing. But that's not an eye to eye relationship between two music styles. For a musician, they know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, that's very important actually. When people say the word fusion, what is that then?
Well, fusion is mostly, that's what I'm saying, when you have both aspects integrated. So you would have a big doses of Indian music, which would be, let's say, long passages of improvisation, maybe with Indian instruments. Or from the Western side, you would have also a lot of improvisation. So you combine the two things. For example, we had, when there was the COVID in India in 2020, we had our national day. And I thought, what can we do in the national day? So I didn't have a reception, whatever. So I said, we do it digitally. So I re-recorded Scorpions, the German rock band Scorpions song to fit into our reunification day. And this Scorpion song is, Wind of Change. And also I contacted the singer of the Scorpions, Klaus Meine, who I knew, and he said, yes, do it. You have the allowance, do it. Don't worry. I'm happy, and I'm also promoting it and whatever. So we had some Western musicians, and I did the arrangement, but then I invited also Indian musicians. Among them, Rakesh on the flute. And now it is a kind of I gave them space in the song where they improvised. And you can see it on YouTube. It's still a perfect example of fusion music because it combines on equal footing both sides. Now, Shakti was also this kind of fusion. And there are some bands which do Indian European fusion, but not too many. More fusion you would have between rock and jazz, between salsa and jazz, and so different musical influences. The fusion between Indian and Western rock, whatever, or pop or soul music, it's not easy to do. So this, if we talk about fusion, it's mostly, I would say, 80% different other music styles, not between Indian and European music, because this is, as I said, the concept it's different.
Interesting. I will definitely come back to you on that after this. I have something, it's a longish wish I've had for a while. So I will come back to you with that.
All right.
And in India, as you rightly said, I mean, there's diversity in all forms. But when you came back to Germany, now, there's a lot of talk of diversity everywhere in the world right now, in the professional area more than anything else. How do you see diversity being practiced? You've traveled and lived in many countries. So, what is your experience of that diversity being practiced in different countries?
I think now with a world which closes into 10 billion inhabitants or 9 billion, where people say, oh, already with 6 billion, it's too many. No, we are really an overcrowded planet now. Of course, with an overcrowded planet, with climate issues and wars in many places, we have a lot of movement on this planet. Migration because of political asylum seekers, and migration because of economic migration seekers. Some neighborhoods are more peaceful, where there is no big migration or where there is no need to go to another country, and others are because of drought, of floods, of civil wars, of poverty, of lack of resources, where people have more urgency to go away, to go to another place. Now, how to settle this? This is, of course, a Nobel Prize question. Every country has or area in the world has a different way of dealing with it. India receives only by new births, I don't know, the saldo between people who are born in India and people who die in India, you still have 11 or 12 million Indians more every year, which is the population of Sweden, I guess, or of Belgium. So every year to India comes a population of Belgium or Cuba, for that matter, 12 million. Now, if you plan for your people, then whatever you plan, you have to plan for 10 million more and 10 million more and 10 million, which makes it a very big challenge. Now, in other countries also where you have a lot of migration, first, of course, it changes the social fabric. Now, the times are gone where you say, oh, this is a truly Spanish nation or German nation. The definition of German or France or whatever itself has changed because it's not only the traditional German culture, but also culture which comes imported from people who come into a country. Now, this is all good and fine. Of course, now the question is how many can come into a country without changing the social fabric, whatever. This is where the politicians come into game and where they have to find solutions which are corresponding to the wishes of their own population, but also which takes into account the kind of international moral obligation and responsibility. As a rich country, you have more responsibility to share your wealth than if you're a poor country, of course. So that's why this diversity is also a synonym for the challenges of the future. How do we deal with people migrating from one side to another? And this is due to the social media and to the media, where you can see from every part of the world, you can see how people live in other places. Now the temptation to go away from your own place to seek a greener grass in other places is tempting. And who would say you wouldn't do the same if you would live there? You know, it's always difficult to throw a stone in a glass house. So that's why it has to be dealt with a lot of sensitivity. And what we can do is to give this topic to the nationalists, the pure nationalists, or let's say the right wing people who say countries should remain pure Dutch, German, Indian, or whatever. If you take the Indian definition is also part. India, for me, it's not only Hindu, it's also 20 different other religions and languages. So the diversity of a country is a huge wealth. And I think most of people in India see it also that way, and in other countries. But of course, there are people who are, putting the nationalism much more in forefront, and in the east and in the west and in the north and in the south. So we have to see that this still is handled in a human way, in a rational way, which considers the interests of different sides.
Where do you feel, because you traveled in that many countries and as I understood, you are more fascinated, or your soul has something to do with India more than other countries, but you were born and brought up in Germany. Where do you really belong? Where do you feel you belong?
My whole life, I would have answered immediately and would have said to the world, to the planet. Now, is it because of getting older that I would say, yes, it's true. I'm integrating into myself all these cultures, but it's also good to have a place where you at least try to settle down a bit, and there where you feel most comfortable. Now, I could have stayed in India and bought, let's say, a house in Kerala, or when I was in Venezuela, then a house somewhere there, or in Kenya, or in South Africa. And I'm sure I would have lived everywhere in a fine way. Now, the question is, when you're getting older, are you revisiting some kind of cultural issues which you had in the beginning, like this classical music, or I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not yet ready to answer it, but I can imagine that at some point the traveling and the gypsy existence of a diplomat moving from every 3 years from place to place is coming slowly to a kind of a slowdown. I don't know. Or will I continue like this until I'm 90? You know, am I feeling exactly the same homey feeling when I'm in Cape Town than I have when I'm in Munich or in Berlin? I don't know. I have proven that I can live in, I think I was in 18 and lived in 18 different countries. So I don't have to prove anything anymore. So I can handle countries and I can feel at home there. Sometimes I said my home is where the family is. But when you're getting older, my daughter is 35 now. She has her own life. My home is where my grand piano is, where my studio is, where my books are, or where good friends are. But friends these days, they visit you also. I don't know. I haven't really answered yet. I'm still a searcher for the real home, I guess.
And you said you said at some point you were a world citizen. You would have said some time back, but now there's another term being bandied around: global citizen. Are you that?
Yes, definitely.
Why?
When you travel, then you have many aspects which you have, but you get a glimpse of how is life in Honduras, or in Tanzania, or in Iceland or whatever. So you see it, you talk to people, you eat the food and whatever. So these are a reality which you have still in your memory. Now, when you have seen 190 countries, then you know, I mean, of not in every country totally deep running, but you have an image of how people live there. What is it to live in Texas, or what is it to live in Vancouver and to be on Vancouver Island? So it's the kind of a global awareness that you know what is happening around this globe. What are the differences? How are the lifestyles? How is the climate and whatever? And this kind of completeness of, it's not totally complete, but it's pretty complete. Completeness of being able to imagine how it would be as we speak now, how it would be to be in Santiago de Chile or in Johannesburg, whatever. It gives you a kind of an, I don't know, it's easiness that you not. It's difficult to say, to get a grasp what's happening on this planet. It's difficult to say that, but this is world citizen, is that you are aware and know some of these cultural tendencies, religious tendencies, political currents and whatever on this planet as much as possible, and the problems and the challenges and the challenges which are shared anyway, because it's about food. I mean, in the future, the mankind's challenges: how do we get all the food for 10 billion people? How do we get the clean water? How do we get where do we travel? How do we get the energy? How do, all these things have to be managed in all these countries. And it's more and more clear that not one country or not one region can do it by themselves. So we have to work together to do this. And lastly, maybe India is in a very good position to have a word to say on this, because first, it's the biggest country with 1.4 billion. So all the mankind's challenges are there in India, and on a big scale. How you provide food for the people, how you provide green transport, how you provide the garbage recycling, how you deal with this in a big scale can have an influence on how the rest of the world deals with it, because we have just not the size to have these experiences. India has it, and India sees it, and has at the same time a lot of cultural diversity, religious, climate zones, languages.
Thank you for listening to the series Between the East and the West. Do subscribe to the channels mentioned on the site in case, of course, you liked what you heard. I am Meenu Gupta, the host of the series, and I'll be looking forward to your comments. We love feedback. Thank you once again. Namaste and bye-bye.